a bit frazzled. I've done a lot of talking. People are probably sick of the sound of my voice.
Nobody could be, and the respect and admiration that people have for you has finally shown itself in the last few days. Maggie, I know we're going to talk about things that you've repeated many times, but I feel like we should be like a dog with a bone. But again, I'm going to try it differently perhaps than other people. As a father, what I don't understand, and I don't care if you're Muslim, English, Australian, Polish, Icelandic, I don't care. Where I come from, the most abhorrent thing that you could do, let's not even call them grooming gangs, they're rape gangs, is rape innocent children, blight their lives, both sexually, mentally, physically, in whatever way. And the longer this goes on and we spend our time saying, well, Jess Phillips in 2015 called, you know, George Galloway a rape apologist, and Elon Musk's wading in and the government is saying no, and is it because he was the director of public prosecution, Starmer? All of that to me is, excuse my French, B-O-double. I'm not interested in that. I want to know why people are covering up what I am beginning to think must go so high and so deep it can be the only explanation. And I'm not into conspiracy theory, but you have to see that point of view, don't you?
You absolutely do, Jeremy. And you know, I'm on your page from the day I started to try to understand why these children were being abandoned and people were turning away, people in positions of power. I've never understood it, because for me, the law is there to prosecute, to protect children, to prosecute paedophiles, and to be equal. And every police officer who joins promises to act with impartiality, with integrity, to uphold the law. And when I saw what was happening, and I went to the chief constable at the time, Peter Fye, he didn't want to hear. I have seen institution after institution try to cover up the truth, to pretend, to close down the conversation. There was an elephant in the room, and I tried to cut out all the noise. But at the end of the day, this is about understanding why this particular crime is so prevalent, why we haven't got a grip of it, and why we constantly try to close down the conversations. And what I would say, Jeremy, is today, you know, we've got an absolute prime example of that. You know, we've got the whip being, you know, cracked to tell people what they have to do. And I've just caught the last bit of your police and crime person from Parliament. And this isn't a personal attack on him, but why was he not saying those things when the Conservatives were in power?
That's what I said to him. He had 14 years. I said that, and I agree. I'm going to go back to something you've said. Because when you do a show like this, the beauty of being able to say what you feel on a station that backs you is great, but you can end up sounding like a dog with a bone. Cover up the truth. You were there, you were at GMP. Just for people who, I mean, how can nobody know Dame Maggie Oliver? She set up the Maggie Oliver Foundation directly because you became the whistleblower on those Rochdale grooming gang cases. It now seems it wasn't 6 towns, it might be 50. I ask you this, right? Why do you believe that whatever level, be it chief constable, head of social services, because let's not blame the average policeman and woman, it's not for them to make that decision, be it higher than that, why do you believe that this has been forced upon us, if you like, and isn't looked into? Is it because this does go higher and many people might be implicated who don't want to be implicated?
I think there's so many threads to this, Jeremy. I think there is absolutely a cover-up at the highest level. I think that they are mistaken, because I think that the country actually understands what's going on and sees what's going on. I don't think the reasons really matter, but we've had 20 years of missed opportunities, more. And in all those years, it's survivors' voices who have been squashed out of this conversation, and it's repeated generations of children that have suffered. And I'm not saying, I never say, you know, child abuse in our country comes from every direction, including the Church of England, as we've just seen.
Yeah.
Canterbury, you know, but these institutions are more interested in covering up the truth than in getting to the root cause of the problem and addressing it. And what it does, it sends these conversations underground. And I do believe that this is going to lead to complete civil unrest unless we have a change of attitude and allow people who understand these problems to engage in a conversation. And by that, I also mean within the Muslim community, because there is a reason why this happens. And then as we see increased levels of immigration, I want to understand how we prevent this getting worse, how we open the conversation and build community cohesion. And by silencing those who are concerned and worried and frightened about the future of the country, in order to address those fears, we have to understand so that we can resolve and address. And when we
I couldn't agree more. And I wanted, there's a couple of things. I mean, the first thing that you said there, obviously, in Rotherham, in Rochdale, it was British Pakistani men, okay? And the police were later saying, and this is a fact, that they were concerned that cultural tension, arguments, whatever, could surface if they were perhaps too, I'm still struggling for the right word, too forceful in their inquiries, which to me is disgusting, because the rape of a child, it shouldn't matter where you come from, you should be incarcerated. But if you and I, as I said earlier to Matt Vickers, were in a different country, and we were on a news station, and we were looking at the United Kingdom, and you brought one up that I didn't know. Well, I did know, I'd forgotten. The Archbishop of Canterbury had to resign recently because of many examples of child abuse within the Church of England that had been covered up. Paedophiles like that dreadful newsreader, whose name I don't even want to talk about, actually, and other accomplices, who watch and look and download the most vile images of children, walk free with a suspended sentence. We then look at these grooming gangs, these cover-ups, and you and I would look at that country and we'd say, that's bloody barbaric. That's medieval, that's outrageous. This is the United Kingdom, which is why every day I get up and I think about this, I think it has to be a cover-up. Why? You know far more than me. Why do you think it's a cover-up? Why do you think this is an issue? Is it because, I mean, for example, you made the point about Muslims, right? Why don't the 99.9% of fantastic Muslim people in this country who work hard and behave within the rules of the law stand up, or their leaders, and decry what's going on? Would that not help the situation?
It would help, Jeremy. I don't know why. I think that there is fear in that community. I was talking to an imam about a month ago, and you would have thought I was, his hero worshipping me. He's the kind of person that needs to be engaged in these conversations. It's not just in this kind of the grooming gang trial, though, Jeremy, that we have cover-ups. We've just had Mohammed Al-Fayed, Harrods, covering up that for years. We had the Jimmy Savile, the BBC covering that up. We've got the police covering up the ethnicity and the class of the children. That there are so many institutions that will not get a grip of the uncomfortable truth. But the other part of this issue is that when people do try to speak out, like I did, we become the enemy. There are many whistleblowers and people in public service who feel that they want to speak out, and yet they have to make a choice between their own financial security, their career, and their job. I was told, senior officers make decisions, you do as you're told, and if you can't do that, you're in the wrong job. We need to completely reverse that thinking. I was their best friend. I wasn't there to cause trouble, because I couldn't understand that what was going on was known at the top. I now know it was. And I've seen repeated abuses of power. I've seen the National Abuse Inquiry be a complete cover-up when it came to organised networks. The man you've just said quoted what I've said this week. It's true. 2 weeks for what has been a national problem for decades. Even
how high do you think it goes, Maggie? How high?
To the absolute top. And for me, the book stops at the top. With Keir Starmer, with the leader of the opposition, with chief constables, we need to bring victims and survivors into this conversation. Calling for a public inquiry is fine, but the question has to be, who is going to lead it? Yeah. What do they want to uncover?
Somebody said earlier it should be, and I like that mark in their own homework comment, because I think that's where the police get it wrong on so many occasions. This has to be an outside person, probably somebody from another country. I mean, the whole thing is so repugnant. Here's a lovely text, though, from David Thomas. Maggie Oliver, how has this wonderful woman managed to keep sane? The frustration of cover-up that she's lived with since getting involved would drive any normal person insane. She's a national treasure and deserves recognition. A lot of people, Maggie Oliver, are blown away by the consideration, the effort and the thought you put into this. But this is deep inside your heart and soul, and you're not going to give up, are you?
No, I'm not giving up, because when you make the decision to tell the truth, and you're doing it for the people that I see every day in my foundation who have lost their lives fighting to be heard. You know, I have got the honour of being able to tell the truth, and I'm not frightened anymore. And the truth is what will get us through this in the end. And I'm afraid that politicians, those in positions of power, from my perspective, are more interested in their own position than in honouring these children.
But you see, there's an interesting thing, right? So here's an interesting thing. Keir Starmer, by anybody's standards, has had the most appalling first 6 months. He's the least popular Prime Minister in the history of the world, it seems, which is slightly ironic when you consider that Liz Truss came before him. I would have thought that any sensible person would have thought this is an absolute way of doing the right thing by the British people, in brackets, those victims first and foremost, because you're the first person that's talked about victims in the last 2 days. It's all about tweets and who did this. I would have thought that somebody would have said to Keir Starmer, this is the right thing to do. By denying a public inquiry, of course, everybody's now saying he's got something to hide from when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions. And so we carry on. What, for you, is the very bare minimum, Maggie Oliver, that needs to happen?
The immediate implementation of all the 20 recommendations that were all we got actually out of the National Abuse Inquiry that took 7 years, I think £200 million. You know, victims' voices squashed out of it, but we did come out with some really good recommendations. It shouldn't have taken Elon Musk to bring this onto an international stage for 3 years later to suddenly say, oh, well, we might implement 3 of those recommendations. We don't know when, and we don't know about the other 17. That's what makes me really nervous about another public inquiry, because recommendations are only that. They're not obligations. We get words, and I don't want to push this another 10 years down the football pitch. I want to see action. I want to see victims heard. I want to see the truth out there. I want to record ethnicity. I want to record jobs of offenders, jobs of children, because I believe there's a class issue with this as well. Those at the top would never be saying these things if it was their children. These are working class children who do not matter. Well, they do matter, and they do matter to me. And if it was my daughter who had been through this, I would kill the abuser. If they weren't dealt with properly, you know, I am... And you know what makes me even more angry? Hearing, and I'm not a political person, Jeremy, I'm not, but hearing Keir Starmer say the other day that this has been hijacked by the far-right extremists. And I am not a far-right extremist. Victims and survivors are incandescent with rage. They are sick of being ignored and failed and blamed and judged. He's in a position now where he can do something about it. And yet he's still, you know, tries to tar those who are calling out the problem. He needs to change his attitude and do something. And at the very barest minimum, immediately implement the 20 recommendations we've got, and then speak to victims and survivors and see what else they feel is needed. Not listen to politicians and people with an axe to grind or an agenda. Proper people who have lived and breathed this.
You know something? Been doing this for nearly 3 years, and I will repeat what I always say. You're an amazing lady. Absolutely, you should get recognised for what you've done. But just listening to you, I could listen to you forever, because there are millions of people in this country who not only agree with you, but thank you from the bottom of their hearts for being that voice for those very victims that we're talking about. And it is always an absolute pleasure. I know you frazzle with everybody, but Maggie, always great to have you.